that we love God's children if we love God and obey his commandments. You got to underline these next two words: loving God. Loving God means keeping his commandments, and underline this, circle this, highlight this, tattoo it on your forehead. And his commands are not burdensome. And his commands are not burdensome. For every child of God defeats the evil world, and we achieve this victory through our faith. And who can win the battle against this world? Only those that believe Jesus is the Son of God. His commands are not burdensome. I want you to consider this question this morning. I want you to consider this question for the rest of the day. Do you trust God enough to put your faith into action? Do you trust God enough to put your faith into action? Because in this Christian thing, in this God thing, there are no shortcuts. If you've come up here sometime during this week and you've flipped that switch, you've said, hey, I want to walk in the light, I don't want to be in the darkness anymore, I want to tell you something this morning, friend. There are no shortcuts. But because of fear, because of worry, because of the analyzation in our brains and our get it right, do it right attitudes, oftentimes I think there can be shortcuts. But John says it very clearly, there aren't. But with that, you've got to understand what God has given us, what God has called us to, his command, his laws, that's not burdensome. It doesn't weigh heavy on us. Though we feel like the pressures of this world, though we feel like the pressures of tomorrow, of this unknown future seem burdensome, God says, if you obey me, if you trust me, I got you. I love in this passage that John is constantly using the illustration of children. He's talking about if we love God's children, if we love each other, if we really understand this, and this isn't any kind of fleeting love, this isn't phileo love, this isn't like brotherly love, this is translated agape love, a selfless love, giving up of yourself. If you love each other like that, if you love God like that, his weight, his cast on you, his desire for you is not burdensome, but in fact light and easy. But I've got to trust him enough to walk in it. So I go back and look at God's original group of children, not Adam and Eve, but the ones that came later, the children of Israel. Their story well documented in Exodus, in Numbers, in Deuteronomy. Here's God's children who God says, these are my people, these are the ones who I'm going to build my kingdom through, who are going to be my light on this earth. But they find themselves in 400 years of captivity in Egypt. And after 400 years, God sends a stuttering brother in the name of Moses to come and stand before the most powerful man in the world, Pharaoh, and said, God, my God, has commanded me to tell you to let my people go. Pharaoh doesn't believe it, so Moses, through the power of God, brings 10 plagues upon the nation of Egypt. And finally, Pharaoh, after losing his son, has nowhere to go. But he tells Moses, take your people. And actually, something comes upon the Egyptians, and they give the Israelites everything they've got. Their gold, their silver, their rubies. He hands them all over to them. God takes them out of Egypt. God brings them into the desert, into the wilderness. God feeds them with manna each morning, quail each evening. And God says, I am bringing you to the land of promise, the land flowing with milk and honey. They camp out at the bottom of Mount Sinai. Moses ascends to the top of that mountain. Moses has an encounter with God. God, with his finger, writes these commandments on 2 stone tablets. And even though God has just brought them out, even though God has just ransomed them from Egypt, the Israelites at the bottom of the hill are fabricating an idol that they can feel and touch and trust. But because God is a gracious God, God is a loving God, God is a forgiving God, he forgives them again. And he says, let's go. I'm still going to take you, young man. I'm still going to take you, young woman, to the place that is best for you. And he says, just far beyond that range is the promised land. Not a figurative land, but a real place. A place that you could go, get on a plane and visit today. Place I have for you. Catch this, young person, the future God has for you. From Sinai, the Mount of Sinai, to the promised land. 250 miles. Put that in your context. That's about from the Gilbert campus or the Mesa campus to the Grand Canyon. Just that seemingly short distance. In a car, you're there in a few hours. In those days, it would have taken 11 days to travel that distance, to travel that 250 miles. But the Israelites get to this place that is infamous, this place that is marked in history, marked in Deuteronomy, and marked in Numbers, where God brings them to this place called Kadesh. And there God says, I want to send 12 of you into the promised land to survey the land and come back and tell the people what I have for them. And they spend 40 days in Kadesh as the spies go over the mountain into the promised land. They come back one after the other. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all with the same report. We can't go there. God can't help us there. Even though he brought us out of Egypt, out of 400 years of captivity, we can't trust that God's going to take us over that mountain and defeat those giants. Many of you are sitting here this morning and you can't trust God enough to defeat the giants in your life because you don't trust God with everything you've got. You don't have that agape love for God and his people because the worries of this world have got your heart captured. But 2 come over the mountain, Caleb and Joshua, and they say, we believe, we trust, and if God tells us to go, we will go. But the councils, Moses, Aaron, could not be swayed by the faith of these 2 young men. So they say, no, we will not enter. We won't trust. And God speaks from on high, and he tells Moses to tell those 2.5 million Israelites, because you didn't trust me, you will wander in the desert till everyone over the age of 18 is dead. You will wander in the desert for 40 years because you didn't trust me. Because instead of obeying me, you made your decision based on the best worldly information you had at the time. And for 40 years, the Israelites wander those 250 miles. Imagine that for 40 years, you're in a car driving back and forth, Gilbert to the Grand Canyon, Grand Canyon to Gilbert, Gilbert to the Grand Canyon to Gilbert, over and over and over, wondering, what if? What if I had trusted God that day? What if those warm June days in 2018 when I sat in that theater in Chapman, if I had said, God, I trust you with my today, I trust you with my tomorrow, I trust you with my relationships, I trust you with my identity. What if I had said, God, I trust you, and because I trust you, I'm going to take one step outside of myself. You see, these folks had spent 400 years shackled, chained up. And the thing about when you're shackled and chained up, you start to believe that it is not your flesh and bones that define you, but it is the steel and metal around your heart, around your brokenness, around your darkness that defines you. You see, God had brought the Israelites out of Egypt, but he had not brought Egypt out of the Israelites. And many of you, myself included, in moments in our life, in circumstances of our life, though we walk around free, we are bound up in fear. We are bound up in the chains and failures and insecurities and what ifs of yesterday before we walked into the light. But John tells us that when we obey God's commandments, when we love God with an agape love, with a selfless love, that God's commandments, God's law, God's love is not burdensome. But understand this, my friends. There ain't no drive-through breakthrough in the kingdom of God. There ain't no drive-through breakthrough in the kingdom of God. If you want this, if you want that freedom, if you want that light, your life must have action. So I ask you to consider this. Do you trust God enough to put your faith in action? The chains of Kadesh are worse than those of Egypt. Because the chains of Kadesh, the chains of today, you have the power to free yourself from. Do you trust him enough?